I've been into synthesizers for a long time, specifically analog synths. I first became obsessed as a little baby and have been watching the synth market ever since. Now, in that time, I've managed to build a modest collection, and like any good synth nerd, I want more synths. But like any poor musician, money is also a bit tight. And so that brings us to the subject of today's video, Behringer. I've never really known how to feel about Behringer. While I can afford to buy their synths, after years of observing forums and online discussions, I've come across so many strongly biased opinions on Behringer that I just wouldn't feel right about buying from them without doing at least a bit of digging into them myself first. To some, Uli Behringer is held up as a saint, a god amongst men, the messiah, heralding in the next golden age of analog synthesis, bringing affordable, high-quality instruments to the masses. And to others, Uli Behringer is the literal antichrist, heralding the incoming apocalypse, destroying the very foundations of the synth industry, and generally making the world a worse place with less innovation. So why such a strong divide in opinions? Which side is right in all of this? Let's get into it. Behringer and the concept of quality have a bit of a checkered past. Their focus as a company has always been keeping prices as low as possible at the expense of seemingly everything else. One of the things sacrificed in this quest was quality. Due to this, Behringer has long since had a terrible reputation within the music industry in regards to the quality of their products, a reputation which is only tentatively beginning to heal in recent years as they seem to have improved their manufacturing process and quality control standards. With their dedication to affordability, they opened up a prosumer market which hadn't existed before, making it more affordable to obtain audio equipment, allowing more people to get into the production game. Now, whilst there is good in this, it's left them with a reputation for creating cheap, entry-level equipment which doesn't last very long and isn't suitable for serious professionals. But, I think that's fine, and people seem to understand you're going to get what you pay for. And as to their synths, which they only began producing more recently, since 2016, the general consensus seems to be way more good than bad. Now, factoring in the cost of these synths, the sound and build quality really seem to hold up. It's worth pointing out that all synth manufacturers end up shipping at least some faulty units. So whilst Behringer may have some faulty synths on the market, it doesn't seem to be more common than any other company. Now, as an owner of a Korg MS-20 reissue as well as the Behringer MS-20 clone, the K2, I have to say that in terms of build quality, the K2 feels about as solid as the Korg. And honestly, I prefer the feel of the knobs, which have a bit of extra resistance. It just feels super smooth. And in terms of sound, they're basically identical. So we all already know that analog synthesizers are the best, but they are also damn expensive. Before Behringer hit the synth scene, there was already some more affordable analog synths on the market. Some of them were good, some, shall we say, a bit less so. But overall, the market for analog synths was rather limited. When digital synthesis was popularized in the 80s, analog synths were booted out as old hat and ended up selling for egregiously low prices. But in the 2010s, culture kind of got back in touch with, analog synthesis being pretty lit, and as demand for vintage analog synths increased, so did their prices. The old classics were bought up, raising their prices, and companies producing synths hadn't yet adapted to the renewed public interest in analog synthesizers, so the market was relatively sparse. At the time, Korg reissuing the MS-20 Mini and ARP Odyssey was a really big deal, and it inspired other companies to follow a similar strategy of reissuing classic synths, as well as releasing new original analog synths. Okay, so unfortunately, Roland hit their head pretty hard right out of the gate on this one, and have kind of been struggling to recover ever since. But, they're still cashing in. Yamaha managed to kind of get involved while also not really getting involved. Moog was able to ride this pretty successfully until very recently. So did Dave Smith Instruments, Sequential. A lot of these big synth companies have been able to ride this pretty well. I mean, Arturia jumped in the mix. A lot of synths, there's been a renaissance in analog synthesis. Some companies have done very well out of it. Other companies have, they've given it a go, I guess. And then there was Behringer, just calmly sitting back, watching, taking notes, and then just releasing an unmitigated torrent of clones onto the market at mind-bogglingly low prices, with all of them sounding actually like legitimately good. Want a mini-moog? You could sell some of your organs and a family member or two into slavery. Or buy the Behringer clone. Analog synths, effectively being a luxury product like a Rolex or a Cadillac, are cool, but ultimately entirely unnecessary if your goal is actually just making music. Whilst they are a high-quality tool you can use to make music, they absolutely are not a requirement. With this in mind, companies producing analog synths, while they do factor in price to a degree, even going to the lengths of having some entry-level units within their ranges, are mostly focusing on producing high-quality luxury instruments. And whilst analog synths cost as much as they typically do, they are beyond the reach of many musicians, available only to those willing and able to dedicate large amounts of money to get access. So Behringer coming in and leveling out the market a bit makes it easier for more people to get involved with a wide variety of analog timbres and helps erode the inherent class implications involved in analog synthesis. This is objectively good, and in my opinion, a lot of the hate that Behringer gets is due to poor shaming, which is kind of rude and unproductive. As has been firmly established already, more people having access to analog synthesizers is a good thing. In this spirit, Uli Behringer, prompted by YouTuber Ben Jordan, donated 1,500 synthesizers and headphones to charity, and a bunch of money as well, I think $200K. So, that's good. It's a big old tick in the plus column. More people having synths is good. Okay. Gloves are coming off now. So Behringer releases their interpretation of the Mini-Moog. Great. And then they're like, hey, we could just put an extra oscillator in this thing to make it polyphonic, right? That's how Polyphony works, right? Yeah, marketing's already calling it the Poly D. And then I imagine at least one engineer probably said something along the lines of, well, we'll need to add extra envelopes and filters for it to be true poly. Best we can do with only one extra oscillator is make it paraphonic, so it'll need to be renamed to the Para D. So they made a paraphonic synth, and marketing cleverly ignored that and called it the Poly D anyway. Personally, I'm disappointed, but ultimately I don't really care. It's just that the idea of a Model D as a legitimate polysynth is kind of appealing, and for a moment I thought that's what was happening until I looked closer into it. So Behringer's had a long-standing habit of, shall we say, outsourcing a lot of their design and R&D work to other companies. As in, one could say it might look like they specialize in basing their products very closely on pre-existing products and then mass producing them as cheaply as possible. Now, they have been sued several times for this, but they haven't actually lost any substantial IP case in 30 years since a suit brought against them by audio equipment brand Aphex. I'd just like to say, this approach carries with it a few key benefits. Okay, so their product has already been market tested, so they know that people like and want the product. The product has already been designed, so instead of having to put R&D hours to create it, a lot of it's already kind of been done for them. So, and that allows them to pass those savings straight on to you. A lot of people and other companies find this practice distasteful, as they believe that Behringer is somewhat getting a free lunch. Investing less into R&D means costs can be kept down, which means products can be priced more competitively, meaning that the company who originally put in the resources to create the design is in a way footing the bill for Behringer. This in turn hurts those companies and disincentivizes innovation. I mean, that's one way you could look at it. But Behringer hasn't been successfully sued in 30 years. So if these practices are actually bad, shouldn't the law step in? Anyway, as someone who's not a lawyer, it sort of looks like suing for IP infringement is immensely expensive. It's just a really expensive thing to do. to the point where it's often more costly than just wearing the loss and moving on. And Behringer has a talent for existing within the letter of the law and not crossing any explicit legal lines. Their tactic with synth clones is to take patterns which have it and go ham. With other products, they want to take inspiration from, which are currently on the market. They fudge things just enough that it technically and legally isn't the same as the original. At least that's what it looks like. So the law is a complex and evolving thing, and Behringer has become very good at finding ways to technically not be doing anything illegal in all of this. Now, I'd just like to make it clear, regardless of anyone's personal feelings, like under capitalism, this is a legitimate way of conducting business and is hardly unique to Behringer. Such practices can be seen as a good thing, especially for the consumer, as it means other companies need to make sure they're either providing enough to warrant the higher price tag or find a way to make their processes cheaper. Basically acting as an agent within the market and following the rules of the market. Now, whether this is inherently good or bad becomes subjective pretty quickly and depends upon the values of the individual assessing these behaviors. I think part of the issue people take with this behavior is that if IP laws didn't exist to protect other companies from companies like Behringer, one could speculate, pure speculation, that Behringer might just make outright copies of other companies' products. So that would overtly violate standards society tends to value about the free market and would be unfair and anti-competitive. That being said, we don't live in that alternate reality, so we don't actually know that's how Behringer would behave. But within the frame of that thought experiment, would any company behave fairly? Like really? I mean, if IP wasn't upheld within the brutally competitive game of global capitalism, do you really think any company would survive if they played fair? Like, one could imagine some form of utopia where companies don't take such direct inspiration from other products already available on the market, but to facilitate that, there'd need to be no demand for cheaper versions of pre-existing products. If I didn't have to sell my organs to afford a mini-Moog, sure, Behringer's Model D would be superfluous. But here in this strain of reality, if I want a Model D, I either sell some organs or buy the Behringer version. Okay, it's time to talk about Peter Kern. I won't lie, I've been studying the situation quite intently over the few weeks it's taken me to write this video, and I am still kind of baffled by this. Okay, so basically, Peter Kern, the editor of CDM, was targeted by Behringer with this video. So the website CDM, Create Digital Music, does articles of music production technology related news. Having spent quite a bit of time checking out their website, I have to say, seems pretty innocuous. Peter Kern, the editor of the website, doesn't seem to hold any extreme or even noteworthy biases besides a general love for music, music production, and equipment which assists in music and music production. He doesn't seem to have overly strong opinions, and in his criticisms, in my opinion, he isn't overwhelmingly harsh. Although I'll admit I didn't read through even close to every article, but I did read every one of their articles I could find about Behringer. I wanted to get a sense of the timeline and what Kern said, which was so egregious to warrant the response he incurred from Behringer. Okay, so there's a couple of articles which stand out, stretching as far back as 2009. Okay, so in two articles from 2009, Kern addresses the accusations levied at Behringer about their culture of copying. In their article from December 2017, they report on Behringer having a website glitch which happened to tease information about new products, and Kern gives a pretty straightforward response of, I don't buy it, it makes more sense that Behringer is lying right now as a marketing tactic. And he is openly disapproving of the tactic. Then in 2018, there's two articles released a week apart. The first covers Behringer threatening legal action against a Chinese website for calling them shameless copycats. The second covers the lawsuit that was thrown out that Behringer initiated against a Dave Smith's Instruments engineer and 20 anonymous users of the forum currently known as Gearspace because they expressed their personal opinions that they don't like Behringer's copycat culture. These articles have a critical tone towards Behringer. Kern doesn't go off on any unhinged tirades or do anything which appears to be at all unreasonable or untruthful. He more or less just reports the facts that are available to him. Now, Uli Behringer did publicly respond to Kern not long after this, explaining Behringer's side of the story, that they felt Kern had misrepresented and failed to present the cultural context in which the statement by the Chinese website was made, which supposedly carries different cultural and legal weight over in China. He also defended/explained the legal action against the DSI employee as relating to the violation of a cease and desist order, then pleads ignorance as to why 20 John Does were involved, and basically just says, just passes it right off to his legal team. He also at length defends his company's IP practices, which he does a lot in a lot of his... If you spend much time reading anything that Uli Behringer writes, it's mostly him defending his company's IP practices. Next article. So then in November of 2019, Kern posts an article about Behringer's attempts to claim trademarks, including trademarks which are actively in use. In this article, he does imply Behringer might not intend to use the trademarks, invoking the concept of the trademark troll, which is basically just someone who bad faith buys trademarks so that they can legally spam people who have violated their trademarks or something. I don't know. It's a whole mess. I don't even care to get into it. So Kern is willing to report on and editorialize about aspects of Behringer that Behringer doesn't necessarily want to have associated with their public image. That's 6 articles I found of Kern being overtly critical out of 53 articles which tag Behringer. Now, you know what's in the rest of the articles? He talks about their gear, features, design, etc. Honestly, a pretty stock standard music gear blog. He does the kinds of product breakdowns I want to read when deciding what gear to buy. Anyways, about a week after the article about Behringer attempting to claim trademarks, Kern releases an article about all of the clones in Behringer's lineup. Good article, I think comprehensive. 2 months later, 17th of January, Kern releases an article about Behringer's remake of the old Moog modules. It's a good article, bit editorial. He makes the obvious comparison between Moog's remakes and Behringer's version, mostly noting that the Behringer versions are actually affordable to mere mortals. Then he goes on to question the necessity of the product, pointing out that it's basically nostalgia bait and born out of a philosophy more concerned with looking back into the past than looking ahead into the future. He also discusses what cheap prices and mass production within the modular world is likely to do to the mostly boutique competitors within the modular market. All very sober, valid analysis in my opinion. And when I first read it, I struggled to understand why it was a week after this article that Behringer announced they'd registered a trademark for Kern, which is the first sort of, I guess, move Behringer really made in the war against this guy. They registered Peter Kern's last name, as a trademark. Strange behavior. Then the next month, they made this post to Facebook where they actively encouraged their supporters to creatively dogpile Kern in the comments. A few days later, Uli made a response to the haters, which frankly doesn't manage to say much more than what we're doing is technically legal. On March 1st, Behringer comes out with this gem, introducing the new Kern Me Groove. Not too long before this, Peter Kern had released a synthesizer called the Me Blip Geode. So the Me Groove seems to be a joke based on that. Now, if you're confused by how this is supposed to be funny, you're not alone. Later, Kern would speak to Motherboard stating, "It's not really about being thick-skinned. If a joke doesn't make sense, then you have to assume it may be intended as a threat and try to respond accordingly." And so the next day, Behringer drops this.
Introducing Kern. Corksniffer. Here at Kern we spared no expense, sourced from the finest and most expensive vintage wines. Each cork has been thoroughly sniff tested to give you that true vintage experience. And best of all, it is a limited edition, so you can be guaranteed to feel special. We at Kern understand you. Vintage synths are not just about the sound, but how they smell. Introducing Kern Corksniffer.
Needless to say, most people don't have the same attitude towards journalism as it seems Behringer does, and immediately a lot of people got pretty upset. There was like a lot of pushback at the time. So Uli made a very mild public apology, which was like deleted along with the video not long after. So, okay, hopefully you can see why I'm baffled by all of this, because like Behringer's response to Kern was completely out of proportion. It makes it really easy to cast Behringer as the bad guy when they go ahead and pull stuff like this, which has, in my opinion, fairly been called out as bullying. Uli did publicly claim that the response wasn't his idea and shifts blame all the way onto his marketing department. Okay, so since there's no way to verify whether that's true or not, it's impossible to really know, but I'm not sure if I personally buy it. So it's at around this stage that things become more complicated than I'd anticipated. So come with me, and we'll be in a world of pure imagination as trying to discern fact from fiction becomes impossible, like right here. Okay, so I'll begin with the facts that we do have. In 2017, Behringer relocated all of its manufacturing to China. December of that year, their workers' strike, as a month earlier, an employee was diagnosed with leukemia. The workers striked under the belief that chemicals present in the factory had resulted in the leukemia and that they were unsafe working there. They had also supposedly brought their own test equipment to check the air within the factory and claimed to have found unsafe levels of formaldehyde. Uli Behringer has responded publicly by saying that their factory has passed all environmental tests executed by a government-certified lab as part of the stringent occupancy permit process. They're paying the medical bills for the sick employee, and everyone got paid leave during the testing period. Uli also states, while it is easier for the more medically educated people among us to understand that cancer won't develop in a few weeks, panic spread among the people who believed that the person's illness had to do with the new factory environment, and people decided to strike. Okay, very interesting statement. According to Google, chronic leukemia gets worse slowly over months to years, while acute leukemia develops quickly and progresses over days to weeks. Also, according to Google, formaldehyde causes myeloid leukemia, which comes in both chronic and acute. So entering the dual reality multiverse.
What really happened here?
Either Behringer is totally honest, and this whole situation, like the many other situations they find themselves in, is a complete misunderstanding. Workers panicked, tested the air, and lied about the results, or maybe even lied about having tested it, or perhaps tested it and were confused about the results, or didn't test it properly and got incorrect results. Something happened. Then the media got involved and blew the whole thing out of proportion.
Does this story seem possible?
And this is possibly the case. This is like entirely possible. From the information we have, this could legitimately be what happened. The other reality is that they did have unsafe levels of formaldehyde in the air, and the leukemia developed as a result of that. Then the company was able to fix their mistake and clean things up before the regulators / testy people showed up.
Is this story true?
In either case, someone is lying, and it isn't clear who, and I don't think I've been able to discern the exact timeline of everything from the information I've been able to find online.
What really happened here?
Okay, stepping further into the split reality multiverse, where we are about to go next will entirely depend on the validity of this website, Glassdoor. When I first came across the employee reviews of Behringer on this website, I cannot express to you the reaction that I had. Taking what's said there at face value, it is utterly damning, and I briefly stepped fully through the door of Uli Behringer actually is the literal Antichrist. Every negative thought and feeling I'd had about Behringer crystallized, and I realized that they are definitely the worst thing to occur to the synth industry, possibly the entirety of humanity. But then I decided to check my sources, and I have to say, Glassdoor has a very spotty record and doesn't seem to be very good at verifying their sources. So everything I'm about to present is potentially inaccurate, but I think it's worth going into anyways, as I suspect others may not necessarily assess this website with a healthy amount of skepticism, and this could be directly contributing to a lot of the negative narrativization around Behringer. The narrative being painted by Glassdoor reviews is pretty consistent. Uli Behringer is a narcissistic, micromanaging 1984 Big Brother-style Stalinist tyrant who creates and thrives off an environment of fear. Employees are fired for seemingly no reason, innovation or independent thought of any kind is actively punished, communication systems are kept archaic solely for the purpose of making sure that everyone can be monitored, conformity is enforced through the corporate panopticon, and the whole show is run very inefficiently from the perspective of worker productivity, satisfaction, and turnover, like they are underpaying everyone as far as they can legally get away with. Now, most of these reviews came in between 2011 and 2014, so the impression given from this story is that this is what things may have been like at the time. But the story doesn't change much in the newer reviews, although they do become less detailed. Moving over to Music Tribe's reviews, Music Tribe, Behringer, same thing basically. Looking through the negative reviews, a very similar picture is being painted. But this is where we have to step through the door again into the alternate reality where the positive reviews are coming from. The positive reviews paint a picture of a good company to work at where employees are given the space necessary to work well as a team and to innovate and grow and just all the good stuff. It's just a place where people are respected and everything is just pretty good, actually. Now, in my research into Glassdoor, I've come to the conclusion that using Glassdoor to try and discern the internal culture of a company is not possible. People who dislike the company and want to harm them for whatever reason can slander them in any way they please with no true standards of verification. There's also no way to verify that positive reviews aren't coming from within the company itself, and there's good reason to think that most companies who are aware of this website actually do populate the site with fake reviews or encourage their employees to leave positive reviews. The more I look at and think about how this website works, the more certain I am that it should be entirely dismissed. From a company's perspective, someone leaving fake reviews trying to slander them, I actually think it's kind of fair and makes sense that they would try to boost their own rating to counteract that. Otherwise, like whether true or not, their rating just eats it. So really, without proper verification, the website is useless.
So Jackson made an account on Glassdoor and he signed up to be the former CEO of Bungie, which he was 100% allowed to do, and he left this review right here. It's a clearly bullshit review. Anyone would read that and be like, yeah, that doesn't seem real to me. Except Glassdoor has left it up on their website for 8 days. And according to them, they have some top secret Krabby Patty secret formula measures to avoid fraudulent reviews making it onto their site, but clearly that's just bullshit here. I assumed Glassdoor would either A, not allow Jackson to do this, or B, take it down once they could clearly see it's bullshit, but neither of those happened. So Jackson's process consisted of just signing up, saying who he worked for, what his position was, and then to authenticate that he was telling the truth, they sent him an email, and it was a link that he clicked saying, yep, I really am this. And then kablammy, Jackson is now registered as the former CEO of Bungie on Glassdoor.com.
Now, Uli has frequently directed people to a website called jobui.com, where Behringer is listed and has a company rating. I haven't had any success trying to investigate deeper into this website, but it claims that Behringer pays their workers what I believe to be a fair living wage. Now, I can't attest to the validity of this website, which brings us deeper into the split realities. Like, I don't actually know how this website verifies its claims. I could not find that information in my searching. Maybe that's on me. I don't know. I couldn't find it. I am sorry. The claims could be real, and Behringer truly is paying their workers properly, or the claims could be lies, and Behringer might be profiting from underpaying its workers. Problem with trying to assert either of these narratives with confidence is that they aren't easy to actually verify. But I'm personally inclined to lean more on the side that Behringer probably is paying its workers, as the alternative narrative would need to be backed up by some evidence, of which I'm not convinced any evidence actually exists. Or if it does exist, I cannot find it, and haven't seen it presented online at all in my research. A lot of people do assert in forums, this whole thing about slave labor. And I just haven't seen any evidence that that is the case. It's a common speculation, but I'm just haven't seen any evidence. I've been looking for it. It's the whole point of this video, kind of, is to see if I can substantiate any of the negative claims against Behringer. But the assertion that they're using slave labor, that's unsubstantiated. Okay. Holy crap. I started out wanting to collect my thoughts on Behringer and come to a simple binary conclusion. Am I okay buying their stuff or not? But the deeper I look into this company, the more two completely separate realities emerge, which are borderline irreconcilable. In one version of reality, Uli Behringer is a good, sincere person who just loves music gear and wants to bring affordable gear to the masses so everyone can share in the utter joy and excellence that is making music. The company acts as a disruptor within the gear industry by being so consumer-focused, forcing competitors to stay on their toes and making sure they're providing value for money. The company may have a habit of cloning everything in sight, but they're not breaking any laws. And by being hyper-aggressive with their cloning and their pricing, they're bringing more value to consumers. And sure, they might have made a few fumbles along the way, but so does any company. And they pick themselves up each time and make adjustments to do better going forward. But the critics and the haters, they don't care. They don't care that Uli himself put synthesizers in the hands of children. And of course, the bourgeoisie of the gear world who can afford to spend thousands of dollars on their fancy Moog and Oberheim and DSI gear, they don't care. They just want to ensure that the poors can't access their high-end music creation gear. Access to high-end music gear is reserved only for those deserving special few. And sure, okay, so now, Behringer's response to criticism may seem extreme at times, but who doesn't get a bit heated when critics are trying to paint you in a bad light? Plus, perhaps it really was just their marketing department getting a bit carried away. So even if it was Uli, all this really indicates to me is that perhaps he doesn't have the healthiest relationship with his own emotions and with criticism. And maybe he needs therapy, and who knows, maybe he got some therapy after that incident. But with the stigma that still exists around therapy, it's no surprise that you'd never hear about it, whether it happened or not. There's just the stigma that exists is not. I'd be astounded. I would actually be really impressed if Uli came out with some sort of public statement about therapy, about getting therapy. I'd be very impressed.
Is this story true?
Okay, so yeah. Now let's step out of the good Behringer reality and go into the evil. Stepping through the door into the evil Behringer reality. Uli Behringer is an egotistical megalomaniac who's drank his own Kool-Aid, buying into his own narrative that he's a disruptive force for good within the industry and skirting all good faith rules and regulations in order to undercut his competition in any manner legally permitted, ethical or otherwise. His company's practices are damaging to the whole of the gear industry, as his company is merely one of many agents hastening the process of late-stage capitalism and ultimately the end of our entire civilization and way of life. He is the mouth of the snake as it begins eating its own tail. Other companies innovate and pay their employees properly, invest a healthy amount into R&D, and pass those costs onto consumers. This is how markets are supposed to work. But then a company shows up which bypasses as many of the costs as possible with no regard for the ethical implications, eats the other company's lunch, and then callously moves on, surprised and appalled by all the haters. And it maintains this facade because it isn't really lying. It sees what it's doing as being genuinely good and is simply too blind and possibly evil to notice or care about the damage that it does. And the haters and critics are all liars, are they? That they're all spinning a dishonest narrative by focusing on the evidence of this company's lack of a moral center? So I guess caring about the implications of unethical practices makes you a hater? I guess assessing this company honestly and trying to maintain some degree of objectivity is harmful to them? If it wasn't, why are they so insistent in coming after vocal critics? Why was Peter Kern targeted so viciously? That's the thing, like he contradicted Behringer's preferred narrative, the one in which they're the good guys and making the world a better place by any means necessary. And see, that's the thing about Behringer. Their ideals and stated goals are ones which seem really nice. Ones that any sane person can get behind. The issue comes in with the "and we achieve this by" part. They spent so much time asking if they could, they didn't stop to ask if they should. And can you blame them? The game of capitalism has been laid out in such a manner where this is an acceptable way to play. Nothing and nobody can do anything to stop them, so why wouldn't they take the superior winning strategy? Like, if Behringer's not going to do it, someone else will, so why leave money on the table?
Not a chance.
Anyway, which version of reality do we actually live in? The one where Behringer is okay and good actually, or the one where they're bad actually? I'm really starting to understand why the subject of Behringer is as divisive as it is. Both narratives do seem to have some weight behind them, and in a way feed into each other. Each side's narrative is in its own way emotionally very, very strong, very compelling. But the situation, I don't think, is actually as black and white as what I've just been presenting. And I think trying to understand it through such a polarized lens is actually kind of ridiculous. I don't think this is a case of a company being purely good or purely evil. I think this is a case of a company trying to do good and play the game with a strategy that's proven to be effective and is allowed by the rules. Now, some people don't like that the game allows for the strategy Behringer uses as they perceive it as unfair. But this perception is subjective and I believe can be argued against. Markets can be brutal, as any deeply competitive game is. Rules are put in place to regulate what is and isn't allowed for the sake of imposing fairness, and that's called the law. Behringer is playing by the rules, regardless of how you feel about their strategies. And as a consumer, you participate in the market and choose which companies you do and don't want to support, just as companies choose what products they do and don't want to create, and how they want to go about making, selling, and advertising them. So if you can afford to support smaller brands that are innovating and charging a higher price tag, that's great. If enough people can afford to do that, those companies get to keep existing. But ideals don't trump the realities of a dynamic market. At the end of the day, your product has to make enough money to justify its existence. And sometimes that means brands who don't adhere to the desires of the market just get priced out. Maybe niche manufacturers aren't able to sell enough luxury instruments during a tough economic climate to stick around. Maybe that's unfortunate, but that's just how it works. When times are tough and resources are scarce, you're spending less on luxury music equipment and dedicating more of your budget towards basic living expenses. That means you buy less Moogs. And if you can't afford to buy any synthesizer, then it's probably something by Behringer. This is just what shifting priorities of consumers due to macroeconomic factors does. And the way the game of capitalism is structured, if nobody can afford luxury goods, those goods can't be produced anymore. Whilst writing this, I've taken a few weeks off where I just didn't work on the script, allowing my mind to wander into just anywhere else because, frankly, this topic was becoming somewhat overwhelming. I rewrote this ending like 5 times. Somewhere I ended up landing on Behringer Good, and somewhere I ended up landing on Behringer Bad. My ultimate conclusion is that I actually still don't know how to feel about Behringer, dismissing all of the nonsense hurled at them, the lies and stuff that, genuine slander sent towards them, and also pushing past the narrativization that Yuli puts forward. There isn't an obvious answer. Like, it's not cut and dry. The thing is, we live in a complex world with many moving parts. Behringer represents an agent within that world which is intent on optimizing for price. They run at very slim margins and release good functional music equipment. The problem is, at some point, lowering the price of things means there's less money going around. Charging less for something, speaking purely in terms of modern capitalism, means that it has less value, which means that the time and resources which went into its creation are less valuable. And for many reasons, a lot of people, there's a lot of upset around that. I believe that's quite probably what's happening. Ultimately, I don't know how to feel about all of this. I'm just some idiot who likes making music. Anyways, that's my take on this whole thing, or lack of a take, I guess. Can we please normalize uncertainty? Like, do we have to have a strong opinion? Like, can we... Everything doesn't have to fall neatly into the good and evil framing, because that's just not always true, I guess. Anyways, I'm curious to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you agree? Disagree? Am I wrong? Have I misinterpreted the information? Or was there some critical information that I missed? I want to hear about it. Thank you. And okay, yeah, so if you watched that whole thing, thank you for bearing with me through all of that. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want to support this channel, hitting like and subscribe would be immense. There's also a Patreon. Also, I make music with my band Cyberspace Oblivion on my other channel, which is linked in the description, so please go check that out. We have an album out and do jams and stuff. Okay, bye.